trio of boys tramps along the length of a wooden fence, back and forth, shouting like carnival barkers. The land. It opens in half an hour. Down a path and across the grassy square, 5-year-old Dylan can hear them through the window of his Nana's front room. He tries to figure out what half an hour is and whether he can wait that long. When the heavy gate finally swings open, Dylan, the boys, and about a dozen other children race directly to their favorite spots. Although it's hard to see how they navigate so expertly amid the chaos. "Is this a junkyard?" asked my 5-year-old son, Gideon, who has come with me to a visit. "Not exactly," I tell him, although it's inspired by one. The land is a playground that takes up nearly an acre at the far end of a quiet housing development in the North Wales. It's only 2 years old, but has no marks of newness, and it could just as well have been here for decades. The ground is muddy in spots, and at one end the slopes down steeply to a creek where a big faded plastic boat that most people would have thrown away is wedged into the bank. The center of the playground is dominated by high piles of tires that is growing even ever smaller as a redhead girl and her friend roll them down the hill into the creek. "Why are you rolling tires into the water?" my son asks. "Because we are," the girl replies. In the morning, but it's still morning, but someone has already started a fire in the tin drum in the corner. Perhaps because it's late fall, wet and cold, or most likely because the kids here love to start fires. 3 boys lounge in the only unbroken chairs around it. They are the oldest ones here. Still no one complains. One of them turns on the radio. Shaggy's playing. Honey came in and she caught me red-handed creeping with the girl next door. As the others feel in their pockets to make sure the candy bars and soda cans are still there, nearby a couple of boys are doing mad flips on a stack of filthy mattresses, which makes a fine trampoline. At the other end of the playground, a dozen or so of the younger kids dart in and out of large structures made up of wooden pallets stacked on top of one another. Occasionally, a group knocks down a few pallets just for the fun of it, or to build some new kind of slide or fort or unnamed structure. Come tomorrow, and the land might have a whole new topography. Other than some walls lit up with graffiti, there are no bright colors, or anything else that belongs to the usual playground landscape. No shiny metal slide topped by a red steering wheel, or a tic-tac-toe board, no yellow seesaw with a central basel to make sure no one falls off, no rubber bucket swing for babies. There is, however, a frayed rope swing that carries you over the creek and deposits you on the other side. If you can make it that far, otherwise it deposits you in the creek. Actual children's toys, a tiny stuffed elephant, and a soiled Winnie the Pooh are ignored. One is face down in the mud, the other sitting behind a green plastic chair. On this day, the kids seem excited by a walker that was donated by one of the elderly neighbors and is repurposed at different moments: a scooter, a jail cell, and a gymnastics bar. The land is an adventure playground. Although the term is maybe a little too reminiscent of theme parks to capture that vibe, in the UK such playgrounds arose and became popular in the 1940s as a result of the efforts of Lady Mahory Ellen or Hurtwood. A landscape architect and children's advocate, Allen was disappointed when she described in the documentary as asphalt squares, playgrounds with a few pieces of mechanical equipment. She wanted to design playgrounds with loose parts that kids could move around and manipulate to create their own makeshift structures. But more important, she wanted to encourage a free and permissive atmosphere, with as little adult supervision as possible. The idea was that kids should face what to them seems like really dangerous risks, and then conquer them alone. That she said is what builds self-confidence and courage. How to land your kid in therapy. Back in graduate school, the clinical focus had always been on the lack of parental attunement affects the children. It never occurred to any of us to ask, what if the parents are too attuned? What happens to those kids? The playgrounds were novel, but they were in tune with cultural exceptions of London in the aftermath of World War II. Children who might grow up to fight wars were not shielded from danger. They were expected to meet in these assertiveness and even in bravado. Today, these playgrounds are so out of sync with affluent and middle-class parenting norms that when I showed fellow parents back home a video of the kids crouched in the dark lighting fires, the most common sentence I heard from them was, "That is insane." Working-class parents hold at least some of the same ideals, but are generally less controlling. out of necessity and maybe greater respect for toughness. That might explain why there are so few adventure playgrounds left around the world, and why a newly established one such as the Land feels like an act of defiance. If a 10-year-old lit a fire at an American playground, someone would call the police and the kid would be taken for counseling. At the Land, spontaneous fires are a frequent occurrence. The park is staffed by professionally trained play workers who keep a close eye on the kids but don't intervene all that much. Claire Griffiths, the manager of the Land, describes her job as loitering with intent. Although play workers almost never stop the kids from doing what they're doing before the playground has even opened, they'd filled binders with risk benefits assessments for nearly every activity. In the 2 years since it's opened, no one has been injured outside of the occasional scraped knee. Here's a list of benefits for fire. It can be a social experience to sit around with friends, make friends to sing songs, to dance around, to stare at. It could be a cooperative experience where everyone has jobs. It can be something to experiment with, to take risks, to test its properties, its heat, its power, to relive our evolutionary past. The risks: burns from fire or pit, and the children accidentally burning each other with flaming cardboard or wood. In this case, the benefits win, because a play worker is nearby watching from impeding accidents but otherwise letting children figure out lessons about fire on their own. Kids once took special pride in knowing how to get to places alone, and in finding shortcuts adults normally wouldn't use. I'm gonna put this cardboard box in the fire, one of the boys says. You know that will make a lot of smoke, says Griffiths. Well, where there's smoke, there's fire, he answers, and in goes the box. Smoke instantly fills the air and burns our eyes. The other boys sitting around the fire cough, duck their heads, and curse him out. In my playground set, we would have called this natural consequences, although we rarely have the nerve to let even such a tamer scenarios than this one play out. By contrast, the custom of the Land is for parents not to intervene. In fact, it's for parents not to come at all. The dozens of kids who passed through the playground on the day I visited and went on their own in 7 hours. In 7 hours, aside from Griffiths and the other play workers, I only saw 2 adults. Dylan's Nana, who walked him over because he was only 5, and Steve Hughes, who runs a local fish tackle shop and came by to lend some tools. Griffith started selling local families on the proposed playground in 2006. She talked about the health and development benefits of freer outdoor playing, explained that the playground would look messy but be fenced in. But mostly, she made an appeal rooted in nostalgia. She explained some of the things kids might be able to do, and they then asked the parents to remember their own childhoods. Did you ever used to do that? She would ask. This is how she would win them over. Hughes moved to the neighborhood after the Land was already open, but when he stopped by, I asked how he would have answered the question. When I was a kid, we didn't have all the rules about health and safety. I used to go swimming in the Dee, which is one of the most dangerous rivers around. If my parents had found out, they would have grounded me for life. But back then, we would get up to all sorts of mischief. Like most parents my age, I have memories of my childhood so different from the way my children are growing up that sometimes I think I might be making them up, or at least exaggerating them. I grew on a block of nearly identical 6-story apartments, buildings in Queens, New York. In my elementary school years, my friends and I spent a lot of the afternoons playing cops and robbers in the 2 interconnected apartment garages. After we discovered a door between them that we could pry open, when I was about 9, my friend Kim and I locked a bunch of younger kids in the imaginary jail behind a low gate. Then Kim and I got hungry and walked over to Alba's Pizzeria a few blocks away and forgot all about them. When we got it back that an hour later, they were still standing in the same spot. They never hopped over the gate, even though they easily could have. Their parents never came looking for them, and no one expected them to. A couple of them were pretty upset, but back then the code between kids ruled. We told them that they were in jail, so they stayed in jail until we let them out. Our parents' opinion on the terms of incarceration would have been irrelevant. I was puzzled over the particular statistic that routinely comes up in the articles about time use, even though women work vastly more hours than they did now in the 1970s. Mothers and fathers of all income levels spend much more time with their children than they used to. This seemed impossible to me until recently when I began to think about my own life. My mother didn't work at all that much when I was younger, but she didn't spend a vast amount of time with me either. She didn't arrange my play dates or drive me to swim lessons or introduce me to cool music she liked. On weekends after school, she expected me to show up for dinner on weekends. I barely saw her at all. I, on the other hand, might easily spend every waking Saturday hour with one, if not all three of my children, taking one to a soccer game, the second one to a theater program, the third to a friend's house, or just hanging out with them at home. And when my daughter was about 10, my husband suddenly realized that in her whole life she had probably not spent 10 minutes unsupervised by an adult. Not 10 minutes in 10 years. It's hard to absorb how much children's norms have shifted in just one generation. Actions that would have been considered paranoid in the 70s, walking third graders to school, forbidding your kid to play ball in the street, going down the slide with your child in your lap, are now routine. In fact, they are markers of good, responsible parenting. One very thorough study of children's independent mobility conducted in urban, suburban, and rural neighborhoods in the UK shows that in 1971, 80% of third graders walked to school alone. But by 1990, the measure had dropped to 9%, and now is even lower. When you ask parents why they are more protective than their parents were, they might answer that the world is a more dangerous place than it was when they were growing up. But this isn't true, or at least not in the way that we think. For example, parents now routinely tell their children never talk to strangers, even though all available evidence suggests that children have about the same very slim chance of being abducted by strangers as they did a generation ago. Maybe the real question is, how did these fears come to have such a hold over us? What have our children lost and gained as we have succumbed to them?